The day I discovered my husband had been living a double life started like any other Tuesday. I was sorting through Robert's winter coats for the annual church donation drive when my fingers brushed against something in his navy peacoat pocket. A birthday card signed with a heart and the letter D. Inside was a photo of Robert with his arm around a woman I'd never seen, both of them smiling at a cake with 70 candles. The inscription read, "To 20 wonderful years together, with many more to come." Before we jump in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. 20 years. I'd been married to Robert for 50. In that moment, standing in our cedar-scented walk-in closet with half a century of memories hanging around me, I felt the foundation of my life crack beneath my feet. The Robert Wilson who kissed me goodbye that morning, the same man who'd held my hand through 3 childbirths, who'd nursed me through breast cancer, who'd promised forever in front of everyone we loved, was a stranger to me. I never imagined that at 72, I'd be staring at evidence of my husband's betrayal, or that this discovery would ignite something in me I thought had died decades ago. A fierce, unstoppable determination to live for myself. This is how I uncovered the truth, reclaimed my worth, and built something beautiful from the ashes of a 50-year lie. When my granddaughter Emma asks about my marriage to her grandfather, I still don't know what to say. How do you explain that the man who taught her to fish, who attended every dance recital, who seemed to embody devotion, had constructed an elaborate alternate reality with another family just 40 miles away? That Tuesday in January, I tucked the card back into Robert's pocket and finished my sorting. My hands moved mechanically through the familiar motions, but my mind was racing, assembling fragments of a puzzle I hadn't known existed. The frequent business trips to Pine Harbor, the missed anniversaries, the phone calls he'd take outside, even in snowstorms, the gradually emptying retirement account he'd explained away as market fluctuations. I prepared dinner that night. As usual, pot roast with rosemary potatoes, Robert's favorite. When he walked through the door at 6:15, precisely on schedule, I greeted him with the same kiss I'd given him every evening for 50 years. "How was your day, dear?" I asked, ladling gravy over his potatoes just the way he liked. Same old, he replied, his smile reaching only the edges of his mouth. The charity board meeting ran long. Everyone sends their love. That night, as Robert slept beside me, his breath even and untroubled, I stared at the ceiling and made a decision. I wouldn't confront him. Not yet. First, I needed to understand the scope of his deception. I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with. The next morning, after Robert left for his weekly golf game with the boys, I retrieved the card and studied the woman in the photo. She was beautiful in a distinguished way, silver hair cut in an elegant bob, confident smile, tasteful pearl earrings that looked eerily similar to the ones Robert had given me for our 40th anniversary. I turned the photograph over. On the back, in unfamiliar handwriting, "Diane and Robert, Pine Harbor, November." Pine Harbor, the lakeside community where Robert supposedly attended quarterly retreats with his investment club. The place he'd once suggested we buy a vacation home, then mysteriously changed his mind. I walked to my antique secretary desk, a wedding gift from my parents, and pulled out my laptop. Within minutes, I'd found her. Diane Parker, 67, retired hospital administrator. A quick social media search revealed photos of charity galas, garden club events, and family gatherings. And in too many of them stood Robert, my husband, looking more relaxed and genuinely happy than I'd seen him in years. But what made my blood run cold was a particular family photo from last Christmas. Robert sat in the center of a couch, Diane beside him, and flanking them were 2 middle-aged adults who had Robert's eyes, his distinctive nose, undeniably his, children. According to the caption, Thomas, 46, and Eliza, 44. Our youngest child, Rebecca, was 43. The timeline crashed down on me with devastating clarity. For nearly half a century, while raising our 3 children in Cedar Grove, attending church every Sunday, hosting neighborhood barbecues, and playing the devoted husband, Robert had maintained another complete life. Another woman. Other children. I minimized the browser window when I heard the garage door open, quickly switching to a recipe site. Robert entered carrying a paper bag from Everly's Bakery. "Brought your favorite lemon squares," he said, setting them on the counter and kissing my cheek. "Thought you might need a pick-me-up. You seemed tired last night." I smiled, accepting the small pastry box. "That's thoughtful. How was golf?" "Shot an 82, my best this year." He beamed, pouring himself coffee. "Stanley's back is acting up again, so we only did 9 holes. I think I'll shower and then run some errands." I nodded, watching him climb the stairs. The man I thought I knew better than anyone in the world was the greatest actor I'd ever encountered. For 50 years, I'd been applauding a performance. As soon as I heard the shower running, I picked up my phone and called the one person I knew would understand. "Carol," I said when she answered. "I need to see you, today. Something's happened." Carol Foster had been my best friend since we taught at the same elementary school in the 1970s. She'd been maid of honor at my wedding, godmother to my eldest, and my rock through every crisis. She was also the only person who had ever expressed doubts about Robert's frequent absences. "I'm home all day," she replied, concern evident in her voice. "Come now if you can." 2 hours later, I sat at Carol's kitchen table, a mug of tea growing cold between my trembling hands as I showed her everything I'd discovered. "That absolute bastard," Carol whispered, examining the photos on my phone. "Maggie, I don't even know what to say." "I've given him my entire life," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "I gave up my career when he got the promotion to regional manager. I raised our children while he worked late. I managed his parents' care. When they were dying, I survived cancer with him holding my hand, believing we were facing it together. And all this time..." Carol reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "What are you going to do?" I took a deep breath. "That's what I need to figure out." "You'll divorce him, obviously," Carol said, her tone hardening. "Take him for everything he's worth." I stared out her kitchen window at the snow-covered bird feeder in her backyard. A cardinal landed, a shock of red against the white landscape. "It's not that simple," I replied. "We've been married for 50 years. Our assets are completely entangled. Our children, our grandchildren." I trailed off, the enormity of it washing over me. "And there's something else. I need to know more. I need to understand how he's been managing this double life, before I make any decisions." Carol's eyes widened. "You're not thinking of confronting that woman, are you?" I shook my head. "No, not yet anyway, but I'm going to find out everything, every detail, and then I'll decide what happens next." As I drove home from Carol's house, a strange calm settled over me. The initial shock was giving way to something else. Curiosity, determination, and underneath it all, a simmering anger that had nowhere to go. For the next 2 weeks, I became a detective in my own marriage. Each day while Robert was out, I methodically went through his belongings, our financial records, phone statements, anything that might provide insights into his other life. I created a locked folder on my laptop labeled Garden Club to document my findings. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The picture that emerged was both simple and staggering. For nearly 26 years, Robert had been leading a completely parallel existence. Diane Parker had been a hospital administrator at Pine Harbor Memorial when Robert's bank opened a branch there, in the late 1990s. Based on old emails I recovered, They had met when he handled the financing for a new hospital wing. While I believed he was commuting to the bank's regional headquarters 3 days a week, he was spending that time with his other family. He'd even purchased a modest home in Pine Harbor under a business LLC, a fact I discovered only because I found property tax statements in a locked filing cabinet in his home office. Most devastating was discovering a series of birthday and Christmas cards for Thomas and Eliza, dating back to their childhood. The father my children knew as sometimes distant but loving had been fully present in the lives of his secret children. I also found evidence of substantial money transfers, our money, funding college educations, down payments on houses, luxury vacations. While we'd lived comfortably in Cedar Grove, I'd always been careful with our resources, believing we needed to save for retirement. Now I understood why our accounts never seemed to grow as they should have. One afternoon, as I sat cross-legged on our bedroom floor surrounded by bank statements, I had a realization that made me pause. In my search for answers about Robert's betrayal, I'd discovered something unexpected. I was good at this methodical investigation, this careful piecing together of a hidden narrative. The skills I'd developed as a teacher, attention to detail, pattern recognition, patience, were serving me well. And strangely, I felt more alive than I had in years. Each new discovery, while painful, made me feel as though I was finally seeing clearly after a lifetime of partial vision. The woman who had accepted Robert's excuses, who had suppressed her own doubts to maintain family harmony, that woman was falling away, revealing someone stronger and more clear-eyed beneath. By the third week of my investigation, I had compiled a comprehensive picture of Robert's double life. I knew where Diane lived, where they vacationed, where they celebrated anniversaries. I knew that Thomas was an architect, and Eliza a pediatrician. I knew that Diane and Robert regularly attended the Symphony Society fundraiser every spring. The same weekend he always told me he had his annual fishing trip with college friends. What I didn't know, what kept me awake at night, was why. Why maintain our marriage at all? Why not simply divorce me decades ago? Robert and I had a good life, comfortable and stable, but it hadn't been passionate for years. We'd settled into the companionable routine of long-married couples. What was worth the elaborate deception? That question led me to a painful hypothesis. I was the respectable wife, the appropriate partner for a banking executive in a conservative Midwestern town. Diane might have been his love, but I was his social credential. My family's long-standing position in Cedar Grove, my volunteer work, my role as the perfect banker's wife. These were assets to his career. I'd been playing a part in his performance without even knowing the script. 4 weeks after finding the birthday card, I made a decision. I wouldn't confront Robert, not yet. Knowledge was power, and right now, power was the only thing I had. Instead, I would use what I'd learned to forge a new path forward, one that Robert would never see coming. That evening at dinner, I smiled across the table at my husband of 50 years. "I've been thinking," I said casually, twirling pasta around my fork. "I should get more involved in community activities. I've been feeling a bit purposeless lately." Robert looked up, mild surprise crossing his features. "You're already on 3 committees, Maggie. The house keeps you busy and you've got your book club." I kept my expression pleasant. "True, but the children are grown and we're both in good health. I still have energy to give." I took a sip of water. "Actually, Carol mentioned the community college is offering a financial management course for seniors. I thought I might take it. You know I've always let you handle our finances. Maybe it's time I understood them better." A flicker of something, concern, alarm, crossed Robert's face before his features smoothed into supportive husband mode. "That's probably not necessary," he said carefully. "Our finances are in good order. I don't want you worrying about all that." I met his gaze directly. "I'm not worried. I'm interested. Besides, It would give me something to do on the days you're at Pine Harbor. His hand froze halfway to his wine glass. What? Pine Harbor, I repeated innocently. Your bank branch. There. Isn't that where you go every Tuesday and Thursday? Oh, he recovered quickly. Yes, of course. Well, if you really want to take the class, I suppose it could be useful. Just don't go making any big financial moves without consulting me first. He chuckled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Of course not, I smiled, cutting into my chicken. I just want to learn. That night, as Robert slept soundly beside me, did he sleep so soundly? I opened my laptop and registered for the financial management course. Then I created a new email address, one Robert knew nothing about, and sent a message to Nathan Brooks, a financial advisor Carol had recommended. Dear Mr. Brooks, I find myself in need of confidential financial advice regarding potentially separating my assets from my husband's without his knowledge, in preparation for what may be a complex divorce. Would it be possible to schedule a consultation at your earliest convenience? Sincerely, Margaret Wilson. The next morning, I woke up before Robert and went downstairs to make coffee. As I waited for the pot to brew, I gazed out the kitchen window at our snow-covered backyard. The Japanese maple Robert and I had planted on our 25th anniversary stood bare against the white landscape, its branches reaching toward a sky just beginning to lighten. 25 years ago, I'd believed we were celebrating a milestone of true partnership. Now I knew that by then he'd already been living his double life for a year. That tree, like our marriage, had been growing on a foundation of lies. Yet as I watched the first rays of sunrise catch its intricate branches, I was struck by its beauty. Despite everything, it had grown into something remarkable. And so, perhaps, could I. My phone pinged with an email notification. Nathan Brooks had responded, offering an appointment that very afternoon. After Robert left for his regular Wednesday morning volunteer shift at the hospital, was he really going there? Or was that another lie? I called Carol. I need a favor, I said without preamble. Can you come with me to meet a financial advisor today? And can you not tell anyone about it? I'll pick you up at 2:30, Carol replied without hesitation. And Maggie, I'm proud of you. Nathan Brooks's office was in a modern building downtown, all glass and sleek lines. As Carol and I sat in the waiting area, I felt oddly calm. The past month had been an emotional whirlwind, but now that I was taking concrete action, a sense of purpose steadied me. Nathan turned out to be younger than I expected, perhaps mid-40s, with kind eyes behind stylish glasses. He listened intently as I explained my situation, interrupting only to ask clarifying questions about our assets, accounts, and financial history. Mrs. Wilson, he said when I finished, I want to be very clear about something. What you're describing, your husband's secret family, the diversion of marital assets, this gives you significant leverage in divorce proceedings. But moving assets without proper legal guidance could potentially backfire. I understand. I nodded. I'm not looking to do anything illegal. I just need to protect myself. For 50 years, I've trusted Robert with everything. Look where that got me. Nathan's expression softened. Here's what I propose. Let's bring in my colleague, Julia Winters. She's a family law attorney who specializes in complex divorce cases, particularly for long-term marriages. Between the two of us, we can help you create a strategic plan. 2 hours later, I left Nathan's office with Carol, my head spinning from all the new information, but my heart lighter than it had been in weeks. I had a plan now, a roadmap to financial independence and legal protection. What's next? Carol asked as we drove back to my house. I gazed out the window at the passing streets of Cedar Grove, the town where I'd spent my entire adult life, as Mrs. Robert Wilson. Next, I said slowly, I create a life of my own. The first step in creating my new life began with a bank account. The following Monday morning, I withdrew $5,000 in cash from our joint savings, an amount large enough to establish myself but small enough that Robert might not immediately notice. Nathan had advised me to open an account at a credit union across town, one where Robert had no business connections. Mrs. Wilson? The young woman at Riverside Credit Union smiled as I approached her desk. Her nameplate read, Jennifer. How? Can I help you today? I hesitated for just a moment. For 50 years, every financial decision had involved Robert's input or approval. Even when I'd worked as a teacher before our children were born, my paychecks had gone directly into our joint account. I'd like to open a personal checking account, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. Just for me. 30 minutes. Later, I walked out with a temporary debit card, online banking credentials, and a small surge of independence. It was a modest beginning, but it was mine alone. The following day, I attended my first financial management class at Cedar Grove, community college. The classroom was bright and modern, filled with about 20 other seniors eager to take control of their financial futures. As I settled into a desk near the front, a tall gentleman with salt and pepper hair took the seat beside me. First time? He asked, offering a friendly smile. I'm James Henderson, recently retired chemistry professor. Margaret Wilson, I replied, shaking his hand. And yes, first time. I've realized there's a lot I don't know about managing money. Same here, James nodded. My wife handled all our finances. After she passed last year, I discovered I couldn't even balance a checkbook. Figured it was time to learn. I'm sorry about your wife, I said, feeling a twinge of empathy. Thank you. Helen was something special. His eyes crinkled warmly. 47 years together. Still miss her every day. The instructor called the class to attention before I could respond. As she began discussing the basics of budgeting and investment planning, I found myself stealing glances at James. There was something refreshing about his openness, his willingness to admit his financial ignorance. Robert never admitted not knowing things. He simply faked expertise or changed the subject. After class, James walked with me to the parking lot. Margaret, a few of us usually grab coffee at Riverside Cafe after class. Would you care to join? My first instinct was to decline. I needed to get home to prepare Robert's dinner. Then I caught myself, feeling the weight of 5 decades of putting Robert first. Instead, I checked my watch. A deliberate gesture of someone considering her options rather than automatically prioritizing someone else's needs. I'd like that, I said finally. And please, call me Maggie. Riverside Cafe was a cozy establishment near the community college, populated by a mix of students and seniors from the surrounding neighborhood. As I settled at a table with James and 3 other classmates, Patricia, Walter, and Dorothy, I felt a strange sense of dislocation. When was the last time I'd spontaneously gone out with a group that wasn't centered around Robert's work or our couple friends? First time in Riverside? Patricia asked, noticing me looking around. Yes, I admitted. I usually go to Everly's bakery near our house. Oh, Everly's is lovely, Dorothy nodded. But their coffee is terrible. Riverside roasts their own beans. Makes all the difference. The conversation flowed easily, moving from coffee preferences to the class material, then to Patricia's upcoming trip to visit grandchildren in Arizona. I found myself relaxing, enjoying the simple pleasure of conversation without pretense. No one here knew me as Robert Wilson's wife. No one had any expectations about who I should be or how I should act. It was strangely liberating. When James mentioned his love of the city symphony, I found myself saying, I always wanted to attend the symphony more often, but my husband isn't much for classical music. The spring season is about to begin, James replied. They're performing Tchaikovsky's violin concerto next month. If you're interested, a group of us have season tickets. There's usually an extra seat or two. I hesitated, knowing that the symphony performance would likely be on a weekend when Robert was home. But then I thought of all the weekends Robert had disappeared to his fishing trips or golf tournaments, outings I now knew were spent with Diane and his other children. "I'd love to attend," I said firmly. By the time we parted ways, I had not only gained financial knowledge, but also something perhaps more valuable: potential new friendships untainted by the shadow of my marriage. As I drove home, I checked. The time: 4:47 p.m. Robert wouldn't be home for another hour at least. I turned into the driveway of our colonial house, the home we'd shared for over 40 years, and felt a strange detachment. The carefully maintained exterior, the manicured lawn that Robert insisted must be perfect for neighborhood appearances, it all seemed like stage dressing now. Inside, I moved through my usual routine of starting dinner, but my mind was elsewhere, cataloging what I'd need for the next phase of my plan. According to Nathan and Julia, I needed to secure copies of important documents: birth certificates, marriage license, property deeds, insurance policies, tax returns, investment statements. Many of these would be in Robert's study, a room I'd rarely entered over the years, respecting his need for a private workspace. But respect was a two-way street, and Robert had demolished that bridge 26 years ago. I waited until after dinner, when Robert retreated to the living room with his usual glass of scotch and the evening news. Moving quietly upstairs, I entered his study using the spare key I'd found in his desk drawer during my initial investigation. The room smelled of leather and the sandalwood cologne Robert had worn for decades. Carefully, methodically, I began photographing documents with my phone, making sure to return everything exactly as I'd found it. Years of maintaining an orderly home had given me a precise memory for how things should be arranged. In the back of his filing cabinet, behind folders labeled with our children's names, I found a red folder I hadn't discovered during my previous search. Inside were documents regarding the Pine Harbor property, the deed, insurance policies, utility bills, all under the name of Lakeview Holdings, LLC. My hands trembled slightly as I photographed each page. This was tangible proof of Robert's double life, evidence that could be critical in divorce proceedings. But something else caught my eye: a small notation on one of the insurance forms listing the policy inception date, February 14th, 1998, Valentine's Day. The same day that, 26 years ago, Robert had surprised me with a diamond tennis bracelet and an unusually affectionate card professing his enduring love. I'd been so touched, believing it was a spontaneous expression of his feelings. Now I understood. It had been a guilty gesture, compensation for establishing his other home with Diane. I carefully replaced the folder and continued my search. In his desk drawer, I found statements for a bank account I didn't recognize, one not included in the financial overview Robert provided annually for our family meeting on finances. The statement showed regular transfers, $5,000 monthly, to an account number I copied down. This account likely represented just the tip of the iceberg, but it was another piece of evidence for Nathan and Julia. As I finished photographing the last document, I heard Robert's footsteps on the stairs. Quickly, I locked the filing cabinet and slipped out of the study, heading toward our bedroom. I passed Robert in the hallway. "Everything okay?" he asked, brows furrowed in mild concern. "Just fine," I replied with a practiced smile. "Thought I might get ready for bed early tonight. I'm feeling a bit tired after my class today." "How was that, by the way?" he asked, his tone suggesting polite interest rather than genuine curiosity. "Enlightening," I answered truthfully. "I'm learning quite a lot." That night, after Robert's breathing deepened into sleep, I lay awake planning my next steps. The financial class was just the beginning. I needed what Nathan had called personal infrastructure, the foundational elements of an independent life. The next morning, I waited until Robert left for his Thursday trip to the bank branch in Pine Harbor before calling Carol. I need your help with something delicate, I explained. I want to look at apartments. Apartments? Carol sounded surprised. You're moving out? Not immediately, I clarified. But I need a place that's mine alone. Somewhere I can go to think, to plan. And eventually, yes, somewhere to live. When I finally confront Robert. I'll pick you up in 20 minutes, Carol said without hesitation. The apartment Carol helped me find was nothing like the spacious colonial house I'd shared with Robert. Located downtown, the one-bedroom unit was on the 8th floor of a renovated historic building, with large windows overlooking Cedar Grove's modest skyline. It was modern, with exposed brick and hardwood floors, a complete departure from the traditional decor Robert had always preferred. It's perfect, I said, standing in the center of the unfurnished space. Are you sure? Carol asked, looking concerned. It's so different from what you're used to. That's exactly why it's perfect, I explained. I don't want anything that reminds me of the life I've been living. The rental agent, a young woman named Tara, seemed surprised when I said I'd take it immediately, offering first and last month's rent in cash. Don't you want to think about it overnight? She asked. I smiled. I've had 50 years of thinking about things overnight. Now I'm ready to make decisions when they feel right. Within a week, I had signed the lease and begun the process of secretly furnishing my new space. I told Robert I was joining Carol for shopping trips, which wasn't entirely untrue. Carol helped me select essentials: a bed, a comfortable reading chair, a small dining table, kitchenware. I paid for everything in cash, careful not to leave paper trails that might alert Robert to my activities. The apartment became my sanctuary, a place I visited while Robert was at work or during his trips to Pine Harbor. I kept a change of clothes there, a few books, a spare toothbrush. It wasn't home yet, but it was becoming mine in a way the house I shared with Robert had never truly been. During this time, I continued my financial management class, often joining James and the others for coffee afterward. As the weeks passed, these outings became a bright spot in my increasingly compartmentalized life. James, with his easy manner and genuine interest in others, was refreshingly different from the men in Robert's social circle. He spoke of his late wife with love rather than obligation, shared stories of his travels and his work as a chemistry professor, and asked questions about my interests and opinions, something Robert hadn't done in decades. You mentioned you were a teacher, James said one afternoon as we walked from the cafe to the parking lot. What grade level? 3rd grade, I replied, surprised he'd remembered this detail from a previous conversation. I taught for 8 years before our first child was born. Robert thought it was important for me to stay home with the children. Did you miss teaching? James asked. The question caught me off guard. No one had ever asked me that before, not even Carol. Every day, I admitted quietly. I loved watching children discover their capabilities. There's a moment when a child who's been struggling with reading suddenly makes a breakthrough. Their whole face lights up. I missed witnessing those moments. James nodded thoughtfully. It's never too late, you know. The community center has a literacy program for adults. They're always looking for volunteer tutors. I considered this as we reached my car. Maybe I'll look into that. I volunteer there Tuesday evenings, James added. They could certainly use someone with your experience. The thought of teaching again, even in a volunteer capacity, planted a seed of possibility I hadn't considered. In creating my new life, I'd been focused on the practical aspects: finances, housing, legal preparation. But what about purpose? What would fill my days with meaning once I was truly on my own? That evening, I approached Robert as he sat in his recliner reviewing work papers. I'm thinking of volunteering at the community center, I said casually. They need literacy tutors. Robert glanced up, mild surprise crossing his features. That's quite a commitment. Are you sure you have time for that with all your other activities? I think I can manage Tuesday evenings, I replied. noting how easily he'd tried to dissuade me without directly saying no. A familiar pattern I now recognized from years of subtle manipulation. Tuesday evenings are when we usually watch that mystery show you like, he pointed out, as if this routine was sacrosanct rather than a habit born of convenience. I can record it, I said simply. Besides, you're often working late on Tuesdays anyway. A flicker of something, irritation, concern, crossed his face before his expression smoothed into benign agreement. Well, if it's important to you, of course you should do it. His easy acquiescence was new. Typically, any disruption to our established patterns required negotiations, with Robert subtly directing the outcome to suit his preferences. But lately, he seemed less inclined to challenge my growing independence, perhaps because he was preoccupied with his other life, or perhaps because he sensed a shift in me he couldn't quite identify. The following Tuesday, I attended my first volunteer session at the Cedar Grove Community Center. The literacy program operated in a bright room filled with small tables, each set up for one-on-one instruction. James greeted me warmly when I arrived, introducing me to Elena, the program coordinator. James tells me you have teaching experience, Elena said, her eyes lighting up. That's wonderful. We have several students who've been waiting for a tutor. By the end of the evening, I'd been paired with Maria, a 40-year-old hospital custodian, who had immigrated from Guatemala 15 years ago. Despite her years in the United States, her reading skills remained at a basic level, limiting her job opportunities and her ability to help her children with schoolwork. I want to read to my grandchildren, she explained in careful English. Not just in Spanish, in English too. As we worked through simple texts together, I felt that familiar spark, the joy of witnessing someone gain confidence in their abilities. When Maria successfully read an entire paragraph without assistance, her proud smile rekindled something in me I thought had been extinguished years ago. James found me in the break room afterward, pouring a cup of coffee. So, how was your first session? He asked. Wonderful, I replied honestly. I'd forgotten how rewarding teaching can be. It shows, he said. You were completely in your element. As we walked to the parking lot together, James hesitated, then asked, Maggie, would you like to grab dinner? There's a little Italian place around the corner that stays open late. I should have felt guilty at the prospect of having dinner with another man. But all I could think was how Robert was likely sitting down to dinner with Diane at that very moment. I'd like that, I said. Piccolo's Italian restaurant was intimate and warm, with checkered tablecloths and candles and wine bottles. Over plates of pasta and glasses of Chianti, James and I talked about books, music, travel dreams. Conversations entirely different from the discussions about family obligations, social appearances, and financial matters that dominated my evenings. With Robert. May I ask you something personal? James said as we lingered over tiramisu. I nodded, curious. You've seemed preoccupied these past few weeks. In class, you take notes like your life depends on it. You've rented an apartment but haven't moved in, and sometimes when you think no one's watching, you look. He paused, searching for the right word. Determined, almost fierce. Is everything okay at home? I set down my fork, surprised by his perception. Most people saw what they expected to see. A contented grandmother, a long-married woman settled into comfortable routine. James had noticed the changes beneath the surface. No, I said finally. Everything is not okay at home, but I'm handling it. James studied me for a moment, then nodded. I believe you are. And if you ever need to talk about it, I'm a good listener. Thank you, I replied, grateful for his understanding without pushing for details I wasn't ready to share. When he drove me back to my car at the community center, James didn't attempt to extend the evening or suggest another meeting. He simply said, I enjoyed tonight, Maggie. I hope we can do it again sometime. I'd like that, I said, meaning it. As I drove home, I realized I'd just experienced something I hadn't felt in years. The simple pleasure of connecting with someone who saw me as an individual, not as an extension of Robert Wilson. At home, Robert was in his study, the door closed. I moved quietly through my nighttime routine, thinking about my evening. There had been nothing inappropriate about dinner with James, just two adults enjoying conversation and food. Yet I kept it to myself, not out of guilt, but because it belonged to my new life, the one Robert had no part in. The next morning over breakfast, Robert mentioned he'd be going to Chicago for a banking conference the following weekend. It's last minute, but Henderson at the main office can't make it, so they've asked me to step in. I'll be gone Friday through Sunday. I nodded, spreading jam on my toast. That's fine. I might see if Carol wants to have a girls' weekend. Robert looked relieved at my easy acceptance. Good idea. You two always have fun together. As soon as he left for work, I called Nathan Brooks. Robert will be away this weekend, I said, without preamble. I think it's time to move to the next phase. Nathan agreed to meet me that afternoon. In his office, he reviewed the documents I'd gathered over the past months, photos of financial statements, property records, the evidence of Robert's secret account, and the Pine Harbor house. You've been thorough, he said, impressed. Julia, and I have been working on your case, and with this additional information, we can start preparing the divorce filing. Not yet, I said. There's one more thing I need to do first. Nathan looked concerned. Mrs. Wilson, I understand the impulse to gather more evidence, but you have more than enough to ensure a favorable settlement. Any direct confrontation could alert your husband to your plans. I'm not planning to confront Robert, I clarified. But there's something I need to understand before I can move forward. I hesitated, then asked, how difficult would it be to find out if Robert is legally married to Diane Parker? Nathan's eyebrows shot up. You think he might have committed bigamy? I don't know, I admitted. But I need to know exactly what I'm dealing with. After consulting with Julia, Nathan agreed to hire a private investigator to look into the legal relationship between Robert and Diane. It would take a few days to get results. While we're waiting, Nathan said, let's take stock of your progress. You've secured important documents, opened separate accounts, established a private residence, and built beginning connections outside your marriage. You're in a strong position, Mrs. Wilson. I nodded, feeling a strange mixture of sadness and resolve. 50 years of marriage were coming to an end, but on my terms, not Robert's. That weekend with Robert in Chicago, I spent time at my apartment, downtown. I'd been gradually making it more comfortable, adding plants, hanging a few art prints I'd purchased without Robert's input, selecting bedding in colors he would have vetoed as impractical. Saturday morning, I met Carol for breakfast at a cafe near my new place. I want you to see the apartment, I told her. It's really coming together. Carol looked troubled as she stirred her coffee. Maggie, I'm worried about you. You're making all these changes so quickly. Are you sure you're thinking clearly? I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. I've never thought more clearly in my life. For 50 years, I've lived according to Robert's preferences, Robert's schedule, Robert's needs. Now I'm discovering what I want. And what is that? Carol asked gently. I considered the question seriously. I want honesty. I want to live without pretense. I want to rediscover the woman I might have been if I hadn't devoted my entire adult life to maintaining Robert's image of the perfect family. After breakfast, I showed Carol my apartment. She walked through the space slowly, taking in the modern furniture, the uncluttered surfaces, the view of the city from the large windows. It's nothing like your house, she said finally. That's the point, I replied. This is mine. Just mine. Later that afternoon, when Carol had gone, I stood at the window of my apartment, watching the light change over Cedar Grove. From this height, I could see the spire of the church where Robert and I had married, the park where we'd taken our children on summer evenings, the high school where we'd attended countless band concerts and graduation ceremonies. For half a century, I'd been woven into the fabric of this town as Mrs. Robert Wilson. Soon, I would exist here as just Maggie, a prospect both terrifying and exhilarating. Sunday evening, Robert returned from Chicago bearing a small gift bag. From a boutique I recognized as one of Diane's favorites. I'd seen shopping bags from the same store in photos on social media. He must have brought the wrong gift home, a slip that revealed how complacent he'd become in his deception. "For you," he said, handing me the bag with a distracted smile. "Just a little something I saw and thought you'd like." Inside was a delicate silk scarf in shades of blue, nowhere close to the pinks and corals I typically wore, but exactly matching the color scheme I'd seen in photos of Diane's wardrobe. "Thank you," I said, keeping my expression neutral. "How was the conference?" Productive," Robert replied, already turning his attention to the mail I'd sorted on the hall table. "Henderson made the right call sending me. I closed the Parkman account." I nodded as if this meant something to me, as if I believed a word of it. "I'm glad it went well." Monday morning, Nathan called. "The investigator has some preliminary findings," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Can you come in today?" 3 hours later, I sat in Nathan's office, staring at the folder he'd placed before me. "Are you sure you want to see this?" he asked. "The facts are what matter for the legal proceedings, not the details." "I need to know everything," I insisted. "I've lived with half-truths for too long." Nathan nodded and opened the folder. "Robert and Diane are not legally married. There's no marriage certificate on file anywhere in the country. However, they do present themselves as married in Pine Harbor. They wear wedding rings, attend social functions as Mr. and Mrs. Wilson, and are widely believed to be a long-married couple." I absorbed this information slowly. So he's not a bigamist, just a liar on all fronts. "There's more," Nathan said gently. "The investigator found evidence that Robert has been preparing for retirement. He's liquidated several investments and transferred substantial sums to offshore accounts. Based on the timing of these transfers, it appears he's planning to leave the country within the next few months." "With Diane," I said, not a question, but a certainty. "That would be my guess," Nathan nodded. "Mrs. Wilson, this changes our timeline. We need to act quickly to protect your financial interests." I closed my eyes briefly, picturing the life Robert had been planning, a comfortable retirement with Diane, perhaps in some tropical paradise, funded by the money we had saved together, the investments I had helped build by maintaining a frugal household while he diverted funds to his other family. "What do you recommend?" I asked, opening my eyes. "We file for divorce immediately. We request emergency court orders to freeze all assets pending equitable distribution. And," he added, "you need to be prepared for Robert's reaction when he's served with papers." I nodded, a strange calm settling over me. "I'll be ready." That evening, as Robert and I moved through our usual dinner routine, him reading the business section of the newspaper while I served the meal I'd prepared, I studied him with new eyes. This man, who had once been the center of my world, now seemed like a stranger. Or perhaps I was seeing him clearly for the first time in decades. "Robert," I said as I set down his plate of pot roast, "do you ever think about retirement?" He looked up, a flicker of wariness crossing his features. "Sometimes. Why do you ask?" "I was just wondering where you see us in the next few years," I said, taking my seat across from him. "Whether you have any specific plans." Robert's fork paused halfway to his mouth. I hadn't given it much thought. Continue as we are, I suppose. Maybe travel a bit more. The ease with which he lied, even now when I knew the truth, was breathtaking. "Travel where?" I pressed. Europe, perhaps. You've always wanted to see Italy. He took a bite of pot, roast, chewed thoughtfully. Though travel is expensive these days, we'll have to see what our finances allow. Our finances. As if we were still partners in any meaningful sense of the word. Yes, I agreed, my voice even. We'll certainly have to see about that. Later that night, I lay awake beside Robert, listening to his steady breathing. Tomorrow, Nathan would file the divorce papers. Within days, Robert would be served, and the careful facade we'd both maintained would crumble permanently. 50. Years ago, I'd lain in this same position, a young bride filled with dreams of our future together. I'd believed in forever then, in the promises we'd made before God and family. Now I understood that forever was simply too long for some promises to last, especially those made to someone who had no intention of keeping them. I turned on my side, my back to Robert's sleeping form, and made a silent promise to myself. From this moment forward, I would live by my own truth, whatever the cost. The morning after my conversation with Nathan, I rose early, before Robert's alarm. I stood in the kitchen preparing coffee, watching the sun cast long shadows across our backyard. The Japanese maple tree we'd planted on our 30th anniversary was beginning to bud with the first signs of spring. I wondered if it would still be mine when the leaves turned red in fall. Robert appeared in the doorway, already dressed in one of his expertly tailored suits, his silver hair perfectly combed. Even approaching 75, he maintained the polished appearance of the successful banker, an image I'd helped him cultivate for decades. "You're up early," he observed, accepting the cup of coffee I handed him. "Couldn't sleep," I replied honestly. "I have a lot on my mind." Robert's expression softened with what appeared to be genuine concern. "Anything you want to talk about?" For a moment, I was tempted to lay all my cards on the table, to ask him directly about Diane, about Thomas and Eliza, about the house in Pine Harbor and the retirement plans that didn't include me. But the time wasn't right, not yet. "Nothing important," I said instead. "Just thinking about how quickly time passes. It feels like yesterday we were planting that maple tree, and now look at it." Robert glanced out the window, his eyes distant. Yes, the years certainly fly by. He checked his watch, a luxury timepiece I'd given him for his 70th birthday. "I should get going. Board meeting this morning." He kissed my cheek perfunctorily, the same goodbye he'd given me thousands of times before. As he headed for the door, I called after him. "Robert?" He turned, eyebrows raised. "Have a good day," I said, my voice steady despite the weight in my chest. After he left, I moved through the house with a strange sense of detachment, touching objects that had been part of our shared life. The anniversary clock from his parents, the china cabinet, filled with wedding gifts, photo albums documenting decades of carefully curated family moments. Soon, these items would need to be divided, categorized as his or mine after 50 years of ours. At 10 o'clock, I met with Nathan and Julia at their office. Julia Winters was exactly as Nathan had described her, sharp, experienced, and unintimidated by high-stakes divorce cases. In her early 60s, with steel gray hair cut in a no-nonsense bob, she radiated competence. "Mrs. Wilson," she began, "I've reviewed all the documentation you've provided. I want to be very clear. You have a strong case for an extremely favorable settlement. 50 years of marriage, your husband's diversion of marital assets to support another household, his plans to abscond with retirement funds. All of this works in your favor." I nodded, hands folded tightly in my lap. "What happens next?" "Today, we file the divorce petition. Given the circumstances, we're also filing for an emergency hearing to freeze all financial assets pending distribution. The court typically grants these requests when there's evidence one party is moving assets." "And Robert? When will he know?" He'll be served with papers within 48 hours, Julia explained. Given his position in the community, we've arranged for a private process server rather than sheriff's deputies. More discreet. I appreciated the consideration, though I doubted Robert would feel the same way. Once he's served, Nathan added, he'll likely contact his own attorney immediately. Things will move quickly from there. He'll be angry, I said quietly, and he doesn't handle losing control well. Julia leaned forward. Mrs. Wilson, is there any history of physical aggression we should be aware of? No. I shook my head. Robert's anger is quieter, more controlled. He's never raised a hand to me. Nevertheless, Julia said firmly, I recommend you not be alone with him after he's served. Do you have somewhere you can stay? My apartment downtown, I replied. He doesn't know about it. Nathan and Julia exchanged approving glances. Good, Julia nodded. I suggest you move essential items there before he's served. Anything of sentimental or financial value that you couldn't bear to lose in case he decides to be vindictive. By noon, I had signed the divorce petition. My name in black ink on a document that would end half a century of marriage. The weight of that moment wasn't lost on me, but neither was the certainty that I was doing what needed to be done. Back at home, I moved methodically through the house, gathering items I wanted to secure. My grandmother's pearl necklace, photo albums of the children growing up, the quilt my mother had made for our wedding, a few pieces of artwork I'd selected over Robert's objections but had grown to love. I packed these treasures carefully into ordinary shopping bags. Nothing. That would alert Robert if he happened to come home unexpectedly. As I worked, I called Carol. It's done, I said simply. The papers are filed. Oh, Maggie, Carol's voice wavered. Are you all right? I'm fine, I assured her, surprised. To find it was true. Actually, I feel lighter. Like I've set down something I've been carrying for too long. Do you want me to come over? Help you pack? No need, I replied. I've been preparing for weeks, but I could use your help tomorrow. The process server will deliver the papers to Robert at his office around 10. I'd like to be moved out by then. I'll be there at 8, Carol promised. That evening, I prepared Robert's favorite meal, beef Wellington with roasted potatoes and asparagus, followed by tiramisu. For dessert, it wasn't a peace offering or a gesture of regret, but rather a final acknowledgement of our shared history. One last meal together before everything changed. Robert seemed surprised by the elaborate dinner. What's the occasion? No occasion, I smiled, pouring the Cabernet he preferred. I just felt like cooking something special. As we ate, I studied him across the candlelit table. This man I'd shared my life with. Had there been signs from the beginning? Had I ignored red flags in my youthful determination to create the perfect marriage? Or had Robert simply changed over time, finding in Diane something he'd stopped looking for in me? You're quiet tonight, Robert observed, cutting into his Wellington. Second thoughts about all these new activities of yours? I shook my head. No second thoughts. If anything, I wish I'd started sooner. Robert frowned slightly. Started what sooner? Living for myself, I replied honestly. He set down his fork, studying me with a mixture of confusion and wariness. Maggie, what's going on with you lately? These classes, the volunteering, the mysterious outings with Carol. It's not like you. Maybe that's the problem, I said, quietly. For 50 years, I've been exactly what everyone expected. What you expected. Maybe it's time to find out who I really am. Robert's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. You're 72 years old, Maggie. Isn't it a little late for a journey of self-discovery? I met his gaze evenly. Better late than never. He seemed about to say more, then apparently thought better of it. The rest of the meal passed in relative silence, with Robert retreating behind his customary wall of polite detachment. Later, as he settled into his recliner with the financial news, I climbed the stairs to our bedroom and carefully packed an overnight bag with essentials for the next few days. I placed it in the trunk of my car under cover of darkness, my heart racing slightly at the clandestine feel of it all. That night, I lay beside Robert for the last time, listening to his familiar breathing patterns, the occasional soft snore that had been the soundtrack to countless nights. Despite everything, there was a moment of grief, not for what I was losing, but for what I had believed we had all these years. Morning arrived with soft spring rain pattering against the windows. I'd barely slept, but a strange energy propelled me through my usual routine. Robert left for work at his regular time, kissing my cheek at the door. "Dinner at 7?" he asked, routine personified. "Perfect," I replied, knowing I wouldn't be there. As soon as his car disappeared down the street, I began moving quickly. Carol arrived at 8 as promised, bringing coffee and a determined expression. "What's the plan?" she asked, following me inside. "I've already packed the important things," I explained. "Now we need to get them to the apartment. Then I need to write Robert a letter explaining why I won't be here when he gets home." Carol nodded, helping me carry shopping bags to her SUV. "Have you told your children yet?" I shook my head. "No, I'll call them after Robert is served. I don't want to put them in the middle." By noon, my essential belongings were safely installed in my downtown apartment. The space, which had felt somewhat impersonal despite my efforts, now took on a more familiar feel with my cherished possessions arranged throughout. Carol looked around approvingly. "It's starting to feel like you." "That's the goal," I smiled, placing a framed photo of my children and grandchildren on a side table. A place that's just mine, reflecting just me. Back at the house, I sat at the kitchen table writing a letter to Robert. The words didn't come easily, despite having rehearsed this moment in my mind countless times. "Robert, by the time you read this, you will have been served with divorce papers. After 50 years of marriage, I know you'll be shocked by this decision, but I suspect part of you has been expecting it on some level. I know about Diane. I know about Thomas and Eliza. I know about the house in Pine Harbor and your retirement, plans that don't include me. I don't need or want explanations or apologies. What I want is to finally live honestly, something I now realize hasn't been possible in our marriage for a very long time. Please don't try to contact me directly. My attorney will be in touch regarding the division of our assets. Maggie." I folded the letter and placed it on the kitchen counter where Robert would see it immediately upon coming home. Then I took one last walk through the house that had been the setting for most of my adult life. In the living room, I touched the worn arm of the sofa where I'd nursed our children, read countless books, and entertained guests. In the dining room, I ran my fingers along the table that had hosted 50 Thanksgiving dinners. In our bedroom, I straightened the wedding photo on the dresser, young faces filled with hope and promise. "Goodbye," I whispered to the empty rooms. By 2 o'clock, I was settled in my apartment, waiting for the call from Nathan confirming that Robert had been served. The minutes ticked by with excruciating slowness. I tried to read but couldn't focus, attempted to unpack, but found myself staring blankly at the contents of boxes. Finally, at 3:17, my phone rang. "Mrs. Wilson." Nathan's voice was professional but kind. "I wanted to let you know that the papers have been successfully delivered. Your husband received them about 20 minutes ago." "Thank you," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "Has there been any reaction yet?" "Not that we're aware of. His attorney will likely contact us within the next 24 hours. In the meantime, remember what we discussed. Don't engage directly, and don't return to the house alone." I had just ended the call when my phone began ringing again. Robert's name flashed on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. Almost immediately, a text message appeared. "Maggie, where are you? We need to talk. This is insane." I didn't respond. Over the next hour, Robert called 6 more times and sent a dozen text messages, his tone evolving from confusion to anger to what appeared to be panic. This is a misunderstanding. You've been manipulated into this by someone. 50 years of marriage and you don't have the decency to talk to me face to face? Where are you? Around 5 o'clock, my phone rang again, but this time it was my oldest daughter, Rebecca. Mom? Her voice was tense with concern. Dad just called me. He's saying you've lost your mind, that you've filed for divorce out of nowhere. What's going on? I took a deep breath. This was the conversation I'd been dreading, explaining to my children that their father wasn't the man they believed him to be. Rebecca, sweetheart, I need you to listen carefully. What I'm about to tell you is going to be difficult to hear. Over the next 30 minutes, I explained about Diane, about Thomas and Eliza, about the double life their father had been leading for over 25 years. I left out the most painful details, but provided enough information that she understood this wasn't a sudden decision or a misunderstanding. Rebecca's initial disbelief gave way to stunned silence, then tears, and finally anger. Not at me, but at Robert. How could he do this to you? To us? She demanded, her voice breaking. Does he even realize what this means? We have half-siblings we've never met. A whole side of our family that's been kept secret. I know, I said gently. It's a lot to process. I've had weeks to come to terms with it, and I'm still struggling. Where are you staying? She asked. Do you need to come to us? David and I have the guest room ready. I'm fine, I assured her. I have a place of my own. I've been planning this for some time. After promising to visit soon, I ended the call and immediately dialed my son, Michael, then my youngest daughter, Sarah. Each conversation followed a similar pattern: shock, disbelief, anger, and finally concern for me. By 8 o'clock, I was emotionally exhausted but strangely peaceful. The truth was finally out in the open. There would be difficult days ahead, but the burden of secrecy had been lifted. As I was preparing a simple dinner for myself, my phone rang again. This time it was James. Maggie, he said warmly. I missed you at the literacy program tonight. Just checking to make sure everything's okay. I hesitated, unsure how much to share. I've had a complicated day, James. A significant change in my life situation. I see, he replied, his tone concerned but not pressing. Is there anything I can do to help? Just hearing a friendly voice helps, I admitted. In that case, I'm happy to keep talking, or I could bring you dinner if you haven't eaten. The Italian place does excellent takeout. The offer was tempting, but I wasn't ready for company, even James's. That's very kind, but I think I need some quiet time. Tonight? Rain check? Absolutely, he agreed easily. Just remember, you're not alone, Maggie. After we hung up, I sat by the window of my apartment, watching the city lights come on as darkness fell. From this height, Cedar Grove looked peaceful, its familiar streets transformed by distance and perspective. Much like my own life now. My phone buzzed with another text from Robert. I'm at Carol's house. She won't tell me where you are. Maggie, please, we need to talk face to face. Whatever you think you know, there's an explanation. I turned off my phone. The next morning, I awoke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows. For a moment, I was disoriented, then remembered. This was my apartment, my new beginning. I made coffee in the small kitchen, enjoying the simple pleasure of using the cobalt blue mug I'd chosen myself, without considering whether it matched existing dinnerware or suited Robert's preferences. Around 10, I turned my phone back on and found it flooded with notifications. More messages from Robert, texts from friends asking if rumors of our separation were true, voicemails from my children checking in. The one that caught my attention was from Nathan. Mrs. Wilson, Robert's attorney has reached out requesting a meeting. Please call me at your earliest convenience. I returned the call immediately. He's hired Gregory Stanton, Nathan informed me. One of the top divorce attorneys in the state. They're requesting an informal meeting before we proceed to the emergency hearing on the asset freeze. What's your advice? I asked. Normally, I'd recommend against such a meeting this early in the process. But given the length of your marriage and the complexity of the assets involved, it might actually be beneficial to set the tone now. Show that we're willing to be reasonable, but firm. When would this meeting happen? They're pushing for tomorrow morning. Julia and I would be with you, of course. Robert and his attorney would be present. The thought of facing Robert so soon sent a wave of anxiety through me, but I pushed it aside. This confrontation was inevitable. I'll be there, I said. After ending the call, I spent several hours returning messages, carefully explaining to close friends that yes, Robert and I were separating, but no, I couldn't discuss the details. To Robert's increasingly desperate texts, I sent only one reply. Our attorneys will be meeting tomorrow. We can discuss everything then. His response came immediately. Attorneys? Maggie, we don't need lawyers to fix this. 50 years together means nothing to you? The hypocrisy was breathtaking. I didn't respond. That afternoon, I met with Nathan and Julia to prepare for the meeting. We gathered around a conference table in their office, reviewing financial documents and strategy. Robert will likely try to minimize his relationship with Diane, Julia predicted. He'll present it as a friendship that went too far, a temporary lapse in judgment. 26 years is hardly temporary, I noted dryly. Exactly, Julia nodded. That's why we need to establish immediately that we have concrete evidence of the duration and nature of his double life. We don't need to reveal all our cards, but we should make it clear we know about Thomas and Eliza, the Pine Harbor property, and his retirement plans. Nathan added, Our goal for this first meeting is straightforward. Secure a temporary agreement, freezing all assets while we work toward a permanent settlement. Given the circumstances, we're in a strong position to demand a very favorable division. I don't want to destroy him, I said quietly. I just want what's fair. Half of everything we built together, and compensation for the funds he diverted to his other family. Julia smiled approvingly. That's exactly the right approach, Mrs. Wilson. Reasonable but firm. The next morning, I dressed carefully in a tailored navy suit I'd purchased specifically for this meeting. Something Robert had never seen before. Something that made me feel strong and capable. I wore my grandmother's pearls and applied makeup, with a steadier hand than I would have expected, given the circumstances. Carol insisted on driving me to Nathan's office. You shouldn't have to face this alone, she said firmly. In the car, she asked, Are you nervous about seeing him? Considered the question carefully. Not nervous exactly. More. Curious. I want to see his face when he realizes I know everything. When he understands I'm not the same woman who's been accepting his lies for decades. Carol squeezed my hand. You've changed, Maggie. In just these few weeks, you've become more yourself somehow. More solid. I feel it too, I admitted, like I'm finally standing on firm ground after years of shifting sand. Nathan's office had a private conference room reserved for the meeting. Julia was already there when we arrived, reviewing notes and arranging documents with military precision. Mrs. Wilson, she greeted me with a firm handshake. You look ready for battle. Not battle, I corrected. Just truth. At precisely 10 o'clock, Robert arrived with his attorney, Gregory Stanton, a distinguished-looking man about Robert's age with the confident bearing of someone used to winning. Robert stopped short when he saw me, his expression a complex mixture of anger, confusion, and something that might have been genuine pain. He had aged overnight, deep lines carved around his mouth and eyes that hadn't been there before. Maggie, he said, my name sounding strange on his lips after 50 years of familiarity. Robert, I replied evenly. Nathan gestured to the conference table. Shall we begin? The next 2 hours were a carefully choreographed dance of legal terminology, financial disclosures, and thinly veiled accusations. Robert's attorney presented their position first, that I had acted rashly based on misunderstandings and incomplete information, that Robert was willing to work toward reconciliation, and that freezing assets was an unnecessary and punitive step. Julia responded with cool efficiency, laying out the evidence of Robert's dual households, the diversion of marital assets, and his plans to leave the country with substantial retirement funds. Throughout this exchange, Robert stared at me, seemingly unable to reconcile the composed woman across the table with the accommodating wife he'd left at home 2 days ago. Finally, when the attorneys stepped out briefly to confer about a specific financial document, Robert leaned toward me. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, his voice low and intense. 50 years, Maggie. 50 years together, and you throw it all away without even talking to me? I met his gaze steadily. That's rich, coming from you. 26 years with Diane. 2 children I never knew about. A house, family holidays, retirement plans. When exactly were you planning to talk to me about all that? The color drained from his face. You don't understand. It's complicated. No, Robert, I said quietly. It's actually very simple. You lied. For decades. You built an entire separate life while I maintained the one you wanted to present to the world. The only complicated part is the divorce settlement, and thankfully, we have attorneys for that. I never stopped caring about you, he insisted, an edge of desperation in his voice. Caring isn't the same as respecting, I replied. And it certainly isn't the same as loving. The attorneys returned before he could respond, but his stricken expression told me my words had hit their mark. By the end of the meeting, we had established a temporary agreement. All accounts would remain frozen for 30 days, while both sides prepared complete financial disclosures. Robert would continue living in our house, while I would remain at my apartment. As we prepared to leave, Robert made one last attempt. Maggie, can we talk privately? Just 5 minutes? I glanced at Julia, who shook her head almost imperceptibly. Anything you need to say can be communicated through our attorneys, I replied. Outside Nathan's office, Carol was waiting to drive me home. As we walked to her car, I felt Robert watching from the building entrance. How did it go? Carol asked. About as expected, I said. He's shocked that I know everything. He's even more shocked that I'm not falling apart. Are you? Falling apart, I mean? I considered the question as we pulled into traffic. No, I said finally. I'm sad about what might have been. I'm angry about the wasted years. But mostly, I'm looking forward to what comes next. Back at my apartment, I changed into comfortable clothes and made a cup of tea. The confrontation with Robert had been difficult but clarifying. There had been a moment, just a flash, when I'd seen genuine regret in his eyes. Not regret for his actions, but regret for their consequences. Robert had never imagined I would discover his secret, much less have the courage to walk away. He had underestimated me. But more significantly, I had underestimated myself. My phone chimed with a text from James, heard through the grapevine, that you're going through some changes. If you need an ear or just company, I'm around. No pressure. The message warmed me. Unlike Robert's desperate attempts at contact, or even my children's concerned check-ins, James's offer came with no expectations, no demands. I replied, Thank you. I might take you up on that soon. Things are complicated right now, but getting clearer every day. As evening fell, I stood at my apartment window, watching the city transition from day to night. Streetlights came on one by one. Windows in distant buildings glowed with the lives being lived within them. Somewhere out there, Robert was likely in our house. Our house, not his. Perhaps sitting in his familiar chair, wondering how his carefully constructed world had collapsed so suddenly. And somewhere, in Pine Harbor, Diane might be learning that their secret wasn't a secret anymore, that their carefully planned future might not unfold as they had imagined. I felt no satisfaction in their distress, only a quiet certainty that the truth, however painful, was preferable to the most comfortable lie. The days that followed established a new rhythm to my life. Each morning, I woke in my apartment, made coffee exactly as I preferred it, and planned my day without consideration for anyone else's schedule or preferences. Some days, I met with Nathan or Julia to review financial documents and prepare for the next steps in the divorce proceedings. Other days, I volunteered at the literacy program, finding unexpected joy in helping Maria progress from simple sentences to complete paragraphs. Word of my separation from Robert spread quickly through Cedar Grove's social circles. Some friends reached out with genuine concern and support. Others, particularly couples who had been part of our social set for decades, maintained a diplomatic distance, unwilling perhaps to choose sides or confront the uncomfortable questions our situation raised about their own marriages. I discovered I minded less than I would have expected. The opinions of others, their approval or disapproval, had governed too many of my choices for too long. 1 week after the meeting with Robert and his attorney, I received a call from Nathan. "Mrs. Wilson, we've received an interesting proposal from Robert's lawyer. Your husband is offering a settlement significantly more generous than what would likely be court-ordered." "How much more generous?" I asked, instantly suspicious. "He's offering 60% of all marital assets, plus the house, plus an additional lump sum of $2 million from his personal accounts." I sat down, stunned by the figure. "What's the catch?" "Full confidentiality. No disclosure of his relationship with Diane or the existence of Thomas and Eliza to anyone outside your immediate family. Essentially, he's paying for your silence." "He's trying to protect his reputation," I realized aloud. "He doesn't want his clients or social circle to know what he's done." "That would be my assessment," Nathan agreed. "What are your thoughts?" I considered the offer carefully. The settlement would provide more than enough for me to live comfortably for the rest of my life, to help my children and grandchildren, to travel or pursue any interest I wished. But at what cost? Continuing to protect Robert's carefully constructed facade, becoming complicit in his deception? "Tell Mr. Stanton we decline the offer," I said firmly. "I'm not interested in being paid for my silence. I want a fair division of our assets. Nothing more and nothing less." Nathan was quiet for a moment. "Are you certain? This is a very generous offer, Mrs. Wilson." "I'm certain," I replied. "I've spent 50 years helping Robert maintain appearances. I won't spend the rest of my life doing the same." After ending the call, I felt lighter, as if I'd passed some kind of test, not one set by Robert or society, but by my own emerging sense of integrity. That evening, I called James and accepted his standing invitation for dinner. We met at a small French bistro downtown, far from the restaurants Robert and I had frequented over the years. "You look well," James said as we were seated. "There's a clarity about you." "I feel clear," I admitted, for the first time in a very long time. Over cassoulet and a glass of Burgundy, I shared the broad outlines of my situation. The discovery of Robert's double life, my decision to file for divorce, the settlement offer I'd rejected that very day. James listened without interruption, his expression thoughtful. When I finished, he reached across the table and briefly squeezed my hand. "You're remarkable, Maggie," he said simply. "Most people would have either remained in denial or sought revenge. You're doing neither." "I don't feel remarkable," I countered. "Just awake. Like I've been sleepwalking for decades and suddenly opened my eyes." "That's exactly what makes you remarkable," James insisted. "The courage to wake up at 72 and begin again." We spoke of other things after that. Books we'd both read, places we hoped to visit, the progress of our literacy students. The conversation flowed easily, without the careful navigation around sensitive topics that had characterized my interactions with Robert. As James walked me to my car after dinner, he asked, "Would you like to attend the symphony with me next weekend?" Tchaikovsky, as promised. I hesitated, aware that accepting might signal a readiness for something more than friendship. Was I ready for that? The divorce wasn't final. The wound of Robert's betrayal was still fresh. Yet standing there in the gentle spring evening, I realized I wasn't the same woman who had discovered the birthday card just weeks ago. That woman had been defined by her marriage, her identity so thoroughly entangled with Robert's that she could barely imagine independent existence. This woman, the one considering James's invitation, was someone new, or perhaps someone very old, a self I'd set aside decades ago, now reclaimed. "I'd like that very much," I said. As I drove back to my apartment, I felt a curious blend of emotions: grief for what had been lost, uncertainty about what lay ahead, but beneath it all, a quiet, steady current of hope. Not hope pinned to any particular outcome or person, but hope rooted in my own newfound capacity for change, for growth, for authenticity. 50 years of marriage had ended. But perhaps something equally valuable was just beginning, a life truly my own. 3 weeks after Robert was served with divorce papers, Cedar Grove erupted with whispers. Despite my refusal to discuss the details with anyone outside my immediate family, rumors spread like wildfire through the community we'd called home for 5 decades. I first noticed it at the grocery store when Harriet Mills, president of the garden club and notorious gossip, approached me in the produce section. "Maggie, dear," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sympathy, "I just want you to know we're all thinking of you during this difficult time. If you need to talk." I selected a perfectly ripe avocado, testing its firmness with practiced fingers. "Thank you, Harriet, but I'm managing quite well." Her eyes narrowed slightly with disappointment. "Well, of course you are. It's just that, well, people are talking. About Robert and some woman in Pine Harbor. I thought you might want to set the record straight." I met her gaze directly. "The only record that matters is being handled by my attorney, but I appreciate your concern." I moved past her toward the checkout, sensing her frustration at my refusal to provide fresh fodder for the town's rumor mill. It wasn't the first such encounter, nor would it be the last. Cedar Grove was a community where appearances mattered, where long-standing marriages were foundations of the social order. Our divorce wasn't just a personal matter. It was a disruption to the town's carefully maintained facade of stability. Later that day, I received a text from Rebecca asking if she could stop by my apartment. My oldest daughter had been struggling, the most with the revelations about her father, vacillating between anger at his betrayal and grief for the family mythology that had suddenly crumbled. When she arrived, her eyes were red-rimmed from crying. "I saw Dad today," she said as I poured her tea in my small kitchen. "He asked me to talk to you, to convince you to accept his settlement offer." I set the teapot down with a sharp click. That was inappropriate of him. He shouldn't be putting you in the middle of this. Rebecca stared into her cup. "He's desperate, Mom. He says his reputation will be ruined if this becomes public. The bank board, the country club, all his clients." She trailed off, then looked up with conflicted eyes. "Would it be so terrible to take his offer? You'd be set for life." I sat across from her, choosing my words carefully. "Sweetheart, this isn't about money. It's about truth. For 50 years, I lived with a man who was deceiving me in the most fundamental way possible. I won't spend the rest of my life protecting his lies." "But what about us?" Her voice cracked slightly. "Dad says if this gets out, it will humiliate the whole family. Michael's law partners, Sarah's in-laws, Everyone will know. Everyone will know that your father made choices, I corrected gently. Not you. Not me. Him. Rebecca dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. He asked about about Thomas and Eliza, whether you're planning to contact them. The question caught me off guard. In all my planning, I hadn't considered reaching out to Robert's secret children. They were adults who had grown up believing whatever story Robert and Diane had crafted for them. Did they know about me? About Rebecca, Michael, and Sarah? Did they believe their father was simply divorced, widowed, or permanently unavailable due to work? I hadn't thought about it, I admitted. They're innocent in all this, just like you and your siblings. I'm not sure I want to meet them, Rebecca said hesitantly. But I also can't stop thinking about them. My half-brother and sister. It's so strange. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. You don't have to decide anything now. Neither do I. This is uncharted territory for all of us. After Rebecca left, I sat at my window watching the spring rain tap against the glass, contemplating the ripple effects of Robert's deception. His secret had breached the boundaries he'd established, affecting not just our marriage, but now our children's sense of family and identity. My phone chimed with a message from James. Symphony still on for Saturday? I could pick you up around 6 for dinner before the performance. His simple, straightforward communication was refreshing after the emotional complexity of the day. I typed back, looking forward to it. 6 works perfectly. That weekend, as James and I enjoyed a light dinner before the concert, I found myself relaxing for the first time in days. He wore a charcoal gray suit with a subtle blue tie that matched his eyes, looking distinguished but not stuffy. Unlike Robert, who had always treated restaurant staff with polite indifference, James chatted warmly with our server, asking about menu recommendations and showing genuine interest in her responses. You seem preoccupied, he observed as we waited for our entrees. Rough week? I nodded, appreciating his perception. The divorce is becoming more public than I'd hoped. Small towns and secrets don't mix well. Ah, the Cedar Grove rumor mill. James smiled sympathetically. Helen used to say it was more efficient than the postal service. Your wife was a wise woman, I said, smiling despite myself. She was, he agreed, his expression softening with remembrance rather than pain. You would have liked her. She had no patience for pretense. Tell me about her, I said, genuinely curious. In our previous conversations, James had mentioned Helen only briefly, acknowledging his loss without dwelling on it. As he spoke about their 47 years together, their early struggles as students, her career as a pediatric nurse, their decision not to have children, her 10-year battle with multiple sclerosis, I was struck by the open way he shared both joy and sorrow. There was no sanitized version of their life together, no careful curation of image or memory. The last few years were difficult, he admitted. Her mobility was severely limited. I became her full-time caregiver. But even then, we found moments of real happiness. Quiet evenings reading to each other, watching the birds at our feeder. The illness took much from us, but it also distilled our relationship to its essence. You loved her very much, I said, moved by his candor. I did, he nodded. Still do, in a way. But I've learned that loving someone who's gone doesn't mean you can't open your heart to new connections. He held my gaze for a moment, then smiled gently. Enough about the past. We have Tchaikovsky to look forward to. The symphony performance was transcendent. Seated in the elegant concert hall surrounded by the soaring notes of the violin concerto, I experienced a profound moment of presence. For 2 hours there was no divorce, no betrayal, no complicated past or uncertain future, just the music, the warmth of James beside me, and a sense of being exactly where I belonged. As we left the concert hall, James offered his arm, a courtly gesture that felt natural rather than affected. Outside, the spring night was mild, stars visible above the modest skyline of Cedar Grove. "Would you like to walk for a bit?" James suggested. "It's a beautiful evening." We strolled through the downtown area, past shops closed for the night, and restaurants still bustling with weekend diners. Some faces in the windows were familiar: members of Robert's bank board, women from my former book club, parents of our children's friends. A few nodded in recognition, others quickly averted their gaze, uncomfortable with the sight of Margaret Wilson on another man's arm while her divorce was still front-page gossip. "Does it bother you?" James asked, noticing my slight tension. "Being seen with me while your divorce is ongoing?" I considered the question seriously. A month ago, it would have. I spent 50 years caring deeply about appearances, about what others thought. Now I find I care less each day. "Freedom looks good on you," he said with a warm smile. He drove me home and walked me to the door of my apartment building. There was a moment of gentle uncertainty, the kind that comes when two people are navigating new terrain together. "Thank you for a lovely evening," I said. "The symphony was wonderful." "It was," he agreed, "but the company was better." He leaned forward and kissed my cheek softly, his hand lightly touching my arm. "Good night, Maggie." "Good night, James." Inside my apartment, I touched my cheek where his lips had been, feeling a flutter of something I hadn't experienced in decades: anticipation, possibility, the quiet thrill of connection. At 72, I was experiencing emotions I associated with my 20s, back when the future seemed wide open and full of potential. The following Tuesday, Nathan called with news. "Mrs. Wilson, we've received another settlement offer from Robert's attorney. He's increased the financial terms, now offering 70% of all assets plus $3 million. But the confidentiality clause remains non-negotiable." "My answer hasn't changed," I said firmly. "I'm not being paid for my silence." "There's something else," Nathan added. "Robert is requesting a face-to-face meeting with you, no attorneys present. He says there are matters that can only be resolved directly between the two of you." I hesitated. Julia had advised against any private meetings, warning that Robert might try to manipulate me emotionally or make promises he had no intention of keeping. "What's your advice?" I asked. "Professionally, I have to advise against it. But personally—" Nathan paused. "Sometimes, in long marriages, there are conversations that need to happen for both parties to move forward. If you decide to meet him, we can arrange a neutral location with appropriate safeguards." After some thought, I agreed. Not because I believed Robert deserved the opportunity, but because I realized I had things I needed to say to him directly, outside the formal structure of legal proceedings. 2 days later, we met at a conference room in Nathan's office building. The attorneys arranged the space, then withdrew, leaving Robert and me alone, but with the knowledge that help was just outside if needed. Robert looked older than he had at our last meeting, the lines in his face deeper, his posture less commanding. He'd lost weight, his suit hanging slightly loose on his frame. For a moment, seeing him this way, I felt an unwelcome pang of concern. 50 years of habitual care not easily erased. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," he began, his voice subdued. "I know you had every right to refuse." "Why did you want this meeting, Robert?" I asked directly. "Our attorneys are handling the divorce efficiently." He rubbed his hand over his face, a gesture of fatigue I recognized from our years together. "I wanted to explain. About Diane. About everything. You deserve that much." "Do I?" I asked, more curious than bitter. "After 50 years of lies, do you really think explanations matter now?" "Maybe not to you," he acknowledged, "but I need to say it. Need you to understand that it wasn't. It wasn't because you were inadequate in any way. It was my weakness, my failure. I sat back in my chair, studying this man I'd thought I knew so completely. Go ahead then, explain. Robert took a deep breath. I met Diane when the bank opened the Pine Harbor branch. She was handling the hospital's financing for their new wing. We worked closely together for months. He paused, his eyes fixed on some middle distance. It started as friendship, then became more. I never intended. I planned to end it before it went too far. But you didn't, I observed. No, he admitted. When she told me she was pregnant with Thomas, I panicked. I couldn't bear the thought of losing you, our children, our life in Cedar Grove. My position at the bank, my standing in the community, everything would have collapsed. So instead of making a clean break one way or the other, you decided to maintain two separate families, I said, keeping my voice level. For 26 years. Robert nodded, shame evident in his expression. It wasn't planned that way. At first, I told myself it was temporary, just until Thomas was older. I provided financial support, visited when I could. But then Eliza came along, and the situation solidified. Years passed, and it became increasingly impossible to imagine untangling the web I'd created. Did they know about us? Your other family? Diane knew I was married, he said quietly. The children were told I had important business responsibilities in Cedar Grove that prevented me from living with them full-time. As they got older, I think they suspected more, but we maintained the fiction. I absorbed this information slowly, imagining the elaborate system of lies he had constructed and maintained for decades. The mental energy alone must have been exhausting. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. What do you hope to gain? Robert met my eyes directly for the first time. I don't expect forgiveness, Maggie, but I need you to know that despite everything, my feelings for you were real. Our life together meant something to me. It wasn't all a lie. A strange calm settled over me as I recognized the truth. Robert wasn't seeking my understanding for my benefit, but for his own. Even now, he was trying to manage how I perceived him, to salvage some portion of his self-image as a decent man who had made mistakes rather than a calculating deceiver who had lived a deliberate double life for decades. Robert, I said gently, you don't need my absolution. You need to reckon with yourself. He flinched slightly. What about the settlement? $3 million, Maggie. Security for the rest of your life, for our children and grandchildren. Our children will inherit whatever I have when I'm gone, I replied. But what they need more than money is the truth. Not just about what you did, but about who they are. Children of a father who made profound mistakes, but who can still choose honesty moving forward. And my other children? He asked hesitantly. Will you contact them? I shook my head. That's not my place. But our children may want to know their half-siblings someday. That should be their decision, not yours or mine. Robert looked down. At his hands, the gold wedding band he still wore catching the light. Is there any chance at all, Maggie? Any possibility of reconciliation? The question hung in the air between us. 6 weeks ago, before finding the birthday card, I might have considered it. Might have been so grateful for his contrition that I would have accepted whatever explanation he offered, whatever crumbs of affection he was willing to provide. But the woman sitting across from him now was not that Maggie. No, I said, my voice gentle but firm. That door is closed, Robert. We both need to move forward. As our meeting concluded, Robert paused at the door. I heard you were at the symphony last weekend, with James Henderson. The statement held a question, perhaps even an accusation. Yes, I confirmed, offering nothing more. That seems quick, he said, a hint of his old authority returning to his voice. I smiled, recognizing the irony. Quick? Robert, I spent 50 years with one man. I think I'm entitled to enjoy dinner and music with someone who appreciates my company without expectations. After he left, I remained in the conference room for a few minutes, processing our conversation. For decades, I had centered Robert in my life, his needs, his preferences, his schedule. Even as I'd discovered his betrayal and begun building my independent life, he had still occupied significant emotional real estate in my thoughts. But sitting there after our meeting, I realized something had shifted. The anger that had fueled my initial actions had evolved into something more nuanced. Not forgiveness, exactly, but a kind of release. Robert's choices were his burden to carry, not mine. That evening, I met Carol for dinner at a small bistro downtown, one of several new places I'd discovered since moving to my apartment. "How was it?" she asked as soon as we were seated. "Seeing Robert alone after everything?" "Surprisingly calm," I replied, scanning the menu with interest. He wanted to explain himself, to justify his choices. Mostly, I think he wanted absolution. "Did you give it to him?" Carol's tone was neutral, carefully avoiding judgment. "No," I said simply. "That's not mine to give. But I did listen. And in listening, I found I was ready to let go of some of the anger I've been carrying." Carol studied me over her glass of wine. "You seem different, Maggie. Lighter somehow." "I feel lighter," I acknowledged. For weeks, I've been defining myself in opposition to Robert. What he did, how he betrayed me, how I would respond. Today I realized I'm ready to define myself on my own terms. Our conversation shifted to other topics: Carol's upcoming vacation with her daughter's family, my growing friendship with James, the progress of my literacy student Maria, who had proudly read an entire children's book to her granddaughter the previous weekend. After dinner, as we walked to our cars, Carol asked, "Have you thought about what comes next, after the divorce is finalized?" "In some ways," I replied. "I know I want to continue volunteering at the literacy program. I might take more classes. At the community college, art history perhaps, or creative writing. Things I've always been curious about but never pursued." "And James?" Carol's tone was carefully casual. I smiled, appreciating her attempt at nonchalance. "James is a possibility, a lovely one, but I'm not rushing into anything." "Good," Carol nodded approvingly. "Take your time. Discover who Maggie is without Robert." The following week brought a surprising development. I was having coffee with James after our literacy volunteer session when Nathan called. "Mrs. Wilson, there's been a significant change in your case. Robert has withdrawn his settlement offer and is agreeing to an equal division of all marital assets, with no confidentiality clause." "What changed?" I asked, surprised by this sudden reversal. "He didn't say specifically," Nathan replied, "but his attorney mentioned that Robert has reassessed his priorities. They're requesting an expedited process to finalize the divorce as soon as possible." After ending the call, I sat quietly, processing this unexpected turn of events. "Everything okay?" James asked, concern evident in his voice. "Yes," I said slowly. "Just surprising news about the divorce. Robert's suddenly agreeing to all my terms." "That's good, isn't it?" "It is," I nodded. "Just unexpected. He's been fighting so hard to keep everything quiet, to protect his reputation. This is a complete change of strategy." The mystery was resolved the next day when Michael called, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Mom, have you seen the Pine Harbor Gazette website?" "No," I replied, instantly alert. "Why?" "Someone leaked the story about Dad's second family. It's all over the local news there, and it's starting to spread to Cedar Grove media too. Dad called me this morning, completely distraught." I quickly found the article online. The headline was stark: "Prominent banker leads double life." Below it was a photo of Robert and Diane at some charity function, smiling for the camera, alongside a separate photo of our family at Rebecca's wedding years earlier. The article outlined the basic facts with journalistic restraint, but unmistakable. Disapproval. Robert Wilson, respected banking executive and pillar of Cedar Grove society, had maintained two separate families for over 25 years. It mentioned the pending divorce, the adult children from both relationships, and hinted at financial improprieties involving the diversion of funds. "Do you know who leaked this?" Michael asked, his lawyer's mind already calculating damage. Control. "No," I said honestly. "It wasn't me, and it wasn't through my attorneys." After we hung up, I sat with the article open on my laptop, feeling strangely detached from the public revelation of our private pain. The story would circulate, generate gossip for a week or two, then gradually fade as newer scandals emerged. Robert's carefully constructed reputation would suffer, certainly, but life would go on. My phone rang again, this time a number I didn't recognize. "Hello?" I answered cautiously. "Is this Margaret Wilson?" A woman's voice, unfamiliar but somehow not entirely strange. "Yes, this is Maggie Wilson." A deep breath on the other end. "This is Eliza Parker, Robert Wilson's daughter." My heart seemed to stop for a moment, then resume at double speed. "Eliza," I repeated, my mind racing to process this unexpected contact. "I'm sorry to call you out of the blue," she continued, her voice controlled but with an undercurrent of emotion. "But given what's in the news today, I felt we should talk directly rather than through media reports." "I appreciate that," I said carefully. "This must be shocking for you, too." A short, bitter laugh. "Finding out your father has another entire family? Yes, it's quite a revelation." "You didn't know about me? About my children?" I asked, genuinely curious. "We knew he was married," Eliza clarified. "He always said his wife didn't understand him, that they had a complicated arrangement, that someday everything would be resolved and we could all live openly. The usual cliches, I suppose. But we never knew your name, never saw pictures of you or your family. You were this abstract concept, not real people with real lives." The parallels were striking. Both families kept in careful ignorance of the details of the other. Both fed carefully crafted narratives that minimized the deception. "Do you know who leaked the story to the media?" I asked. "My brother, Thomas," Eliza admitted. "He found out Dad was planning to leave the country with our mother, abandoning us with vague promises of staying in touch. When he confronted him, Dad admitted the divorce proceedings and his financial troubles. Thomas was furious, felt we deserved to know the whole truth after a lifetime of half-truths." Pieces of the puzzle fell into place. Robert's sudden willingness to settle the divorce quickly, his abandonment of the confidentiality clause, all because the secret was already out, making his previous demands irrelevant. "I'm sorry you found out this way," I said, meaning it sincerely. "None of this is your fault, or your brother's, or my children's." "I know," Eliza said softly. "That's partly why I'm calling. I wondered if you think your children might be open to meeting us someday. Not now, obviously. Everything is too raw. But eventually, we are family, in some strange way." The question caught me off guard, but I found myself nodding even though she couldn't see me. "I think they might. When they're ready. It might help all of you to understand that you weren't alone in this deception." Our conversation continued for nearly an hour, carefully navigating the emotional complexities of our shared situation. I learned that Eliza was a pediatrician, married with 2 young children. Thomas was an architect, recently divorced, struggling with anger issues that now made more sense in context. They had grown up with a father who was present but absent, loving but distant, a man who appeared for important occasions but missed the daily texture of their lives. By the time we ended the call, I felt a curious connection to this woman. I'd never met, a daughter-in-law of sorts in the most unconventional sense. We promised to stay in touch, to potentially arrange a meeting between the siblings when emotions had settled. That evening, as I prepared for bed, I realized I was standing at a threshold between my old life and whatever came next. The public. Revelation of Robert's deception, painful as it was for all involved, had broken the final bonds that tied me to the past. There would be no more secrets, no more careful navigation of half-truths, no more pretense. For the first time in my adult life, I could simply be Maggie, not defined by my relationship to Robert or my status as a betrayed wife, but as a woman, in her own right, with her own choices to make and her own future to shape. As I drifted toward sleep, I found myself thinking not of Robert or the divorce or the media coverage, but of the symphony performance with James, of Maria's proud smile as she read to her granddaughter, of the art history class I'd enrolled in for the summer term. Small pleasures, personal achievements, genuine connections, the building blocks of a life reclaimed. Outside my apartment window, the lights of Cedar Grove twinkled in the spring darkness. Somewhere out there, Robert was facing the collapse of his carefully constructed world. Diane was perhaps contemplating a future different from what she'd been promised. Thomas and Eliza were processing revelations that changed their understanding of their family history. I felt compassion for all of them, but no longer responsibility. For 50 years, I had anchored my identity in being Mrs. Robert Wilson. Now, at 72, I was finally discovering who Margaret had been all along, a woman of strength, resilience, and capacity for joy I had never fully recognized. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new conversations, new decisions. But tonight, for the first time in longer than I could remember, I fell asleep without wondering what Robert would think, without calculating how my choices might affect his, comfort or convenience, without surrendering my needs to maintain the illusion of a perfect marriage. Tonight, I slept the untroubled sleep of a woman coming home to herself at last. 6 months after discovering Robert's birthday card, I stood in the courthouse hallway waiting for my attorney. The marble floors gleamed under fluorescent lights, and the wooden benches lining the walls were polished to a soft glow by decades of anxious hands. Today was the final hearing for our divorce, the legal conclusion to 50 years of marriage. Mrs. Wilson. Julia approached, briefcase in hand, her gray suit impeccably tailored. "Are you ready?" I nodded, smoothing the front of my emerald green dress, a color Robert had always claimed was too bold for a woman my age. As ready as I'll ever be. Inside the courtroom, Robert and his attorney were already seated at the opposite table. Robert glanced up as I entered, his expression unreadable. He looked older, diminished somehow, the confident posture of the successful banker replaced by the slumped shoulders of a man facing consequences long deferred. The proceedings were mercifully brief. The judge reviewed our settlement agreement, confirmed our mutual consent, and with the stroke of a pen, dissolved 5 decades of matrimony. No dramatic speeches, no last-minute revelations, just the quiet conclusion of legal paperwork. "Congratulations," Julia said as we exited the courtroom. "You're officially divorced." The word hung in the air between us. Divorced. At 72, I had become something I never imagined. A single woman, legally unbound from the man who had defined much of my adult identity. "How do you feel?" Julia asked, studying my face. I considered the question seriously. "Lighter," I said finally. "Like I've set down a heavy suitcase I've been carrying for years." Outside the courthouse, autumn sunlight bathed Cedar Grove in golden light. The maple trees lining the square had begun their transformation, their leaves shifting from green to vibrant oranges and reds. A reminder that change, while sometimes painful, could also be beautiful. Robert emerged from the building a few minutes after us, his attorney at his side. He hesitated when he saw me standing on the steps, then approached with cautious determination. "Maggie," he said, his voice rough with emotion I couldn't quite identify. May I speak with you for a moment? Julia raised an eyebrow in silent question. I nodded, indicating I was comfortable with a brief conversation. I'll wait by the car, she said, giving Robert a pointed look before walking toward the parking lot. Robert and I stood facing each other in awkward silence. 50 years of shared history between us and now an uncertain future ahead. So that's it, he said finally. Half a century ended in a 15-minute hearing. The marriage ended long before today, Robert, I replied gently. We're just making it official. He nodded, acknowledging the truth of my statement. The bank asked for my resignation last week. Too much negative publicity. 50 years of service, and they couldn't wait to distance themselves. I felt a flicker of compassion despite everything. Robert's identity had been so thoroughly entwined with his professional status, his standing in the community. Now that was gone too. What will you do? I asked. I'm not sure, he admitted. Diane and things are complicated. She's angry. About the retirement plans falling through. About everything becoming public. He gave a bitter laugh. Turns out neither of my lives was built on very solid ground. For a moment, I glimpsed the profound loneliness at the core of Robert's existence. A man who had created 2 families yet belonged fully to neither, who had spent decades maintaining appearances while sacrificing authenticity, who now stood, alone with the wreckage of his carefully constructed facade. I hope you find some peace, Robert, I said, meaning it sincerely, for both our sakes. He looked at me with surprise, perhaps expecting recrimination rather than compassion. You've changed, Maggie. You seem... He searched for the word. Stronger. I am stronger, I acknowledged, and I'm still discovering who I can be. As I turned to leave, Robert called after me. Are you seeing him? Henderson? I paused, considering how to respond. In the months since our separation, my friendship with James had deepened into something meaningful. Though we were taking things slowly, both aware of the complexities of new relationships after long marriages. Yes, I said simply. James is part of my life now. Robert's face tightened momentarily, then relaxed into resignation. I hope he appreciates what he has. With that final exchange, we parted, not as enemies, not quite as friends, but as 2 people acknowledging the end of a shared chapter and the beginning of separate stories. That evening, James came to my apartment for dinner. I'd been cooking more adventurously in recent months, experimenting with spices and techniques Robert had always dismissed as too exotic. Tonight's menu featured Moroccan tagine with preserved lemons and olives served over couscous, a far cry from the conventional American dishes that had dominated our family table for decades. To new beginnings, James raised his wine glass in a toast. And to the officially single Margaret Wilson. I clinked my glass against his, smiling. It feels strange to say it out loud. Divorced after 50 years. Regrets? He asked, his blue eyes searching mine with genuine interest. I considered the question as I sipped my wine. About the divorce? No. About staying in an unfulfilling marriage for so long? Perhaps. But I can't change the past. I can only move forward. After dinner, we settled on my small balcony overlooking the city lights. The evening was cool, with the crisp scent of autumn in the air. James draped a soft blanket over my shoulders, his hand lingering warmly on my back. I have something for you, he said, reaching into his pocket and producing a small gift-wrapped package. A little celebration of your fresh start. Inside was a delicate silver bookmark engraved with a single word. Courage. James, I breathed, touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. It's perfect. When Helen was first diagnosed with MS, he explained, a friend gave her a similar bookmark. It became her talisman of sorts, a reminder that courage isn't about fearlessness. but about moving forward despite fear. He took my hand gently. What you've done these past months, Maggie, rebuilding your life at 72, that takes remarkable courage. Later that night, after James had gone home, I sat by my window with a cup of tea, turning the silver bookmark over in my fingers. Courage. Had it been courage that propelled me forward these past months, or simply the absence of alternatives? When your life is upended so completely, you can either collapse or rebuild. I had chosen to rebuild. The next morning, I received a text from my literacy student, Maria. Attached was a photo of her proudly holding up a letter, her acceptance, to a nursing assistant certification program at the community college. I did it, Teacher Maggie. You helped me read good enough for school. My heart swelled with pride for this determined woman who had overcome so many obstacles to pursue her dreams. Our weekly lessons had evolved from basic reading skills to studying for the entrance exam, with Maria working tirelessly between sessions, despite her full-time job and family responsibilities. I texted back, "Congratulations, Maria. You earned this through your hard work. I'm so proud of you." Her success reminded me of something I had almost forgotten: the deep satisfaction of helping others grow, of using my teaching skills to make a meaningful difference. In my years as Mrs. Robert Wilson, socialite and banker's wife, I had channeled my energies into volunteer work that was socially acceptable but often superficial, chairing charity galas, organizing silent auctions, serving on committees where appearance mattered more than impact. Now, in this new chapter, I was rediscovering purpose that resonated with my authentic self. That afternoon, I met Rebecca for lunch at a small cafe downtown. My relationship with my children had been strained in the immediate aftermath of the divorce filing, but over time, as they processed their own feelings about their father's deception, we had found our way back to solid ground. "You look wonderful, Mom," Rebecca said as we settled at our table. "That color suits you." I smiled, glancing down at my turquoise blouse, another shade Robert had deemed too youthful for me. "I'm experimenting with my style. Turns out I actually enjoy color." Rebecca laughed, a warm sound that reminded me of her childhood giggles. Dad always did prefer everything neutral and understated. She paused, her expression growing more serious. "Speaking of Dad, I got a call from Eliza last week." My breath caught slightly. In the months since our first phone conversation, Eliza Parker and I had maintained occasional contact, but the relationship between the half-siblings was still developing cautiously. "How did that go?" I asked. "Better than I expected," Rebecca admitted. "We talked for almost 2 hours. She's actually quite lovely, Mom. Warm and funny and smart. We're thinking of meeting in person next month. Michael's on board, but Sarah's still hesitant." "That's understandable," I said gently. "Each of you needs to process this in your own way, at your own pace. There's no rule book for discovering adult half-siblings in your 40s. "That's what Eliza said too," Rebecca nodded. "She mentioned, 'You've been kind to her. That means a lot to me.'" "She and Thomas are innocent in all this," I replied. "Just as you three are. The choices were your father's and Diane's, not yours." After lunch, as Rebecca and I walked to our cars, she linked her arm through mine, a gesture of affection she hadn't offered in months. "I'm proud of you, Mom," she said unexpectedly. "The way you've handled everything. You could have been bitter or vengeful, but instead you've been dignified, strong." Tears pricked at my eyes. "I've been trying to focus on building something new rather than dwelling on what was lost." "It shows," Rebecca smiled. "Dad seems diminished somehow. But you're blossoming." That evening, I attended my art history class at the community college. For the first time since discovering Robert's betrayal, I found myself thinking about him with something approaching compassion rather than anger or hurt. According to our children, he was struggling to adjust to his diminished circumstances, his banking career over, his social standing in Cedar Grove irreparably damaged, his relationship with Diane strained by the public exposure of their arrangement. While I had been building a new life brick by brick, my downtown apartment, my friendship with James, my volunteer work, my classes, Robert had been watching his carefully constructed world crumble around him. There was a poetic justice in that outcome, but I took no pleasure in his suffering. After class, I checked my phone to find a message from James. Beautiful evening for stargazing. Observatory open late tonight for the meteor shower. Interested? I smiled, typing back, pick me up in 20 minutes. An hour later, we sat on a blanket on the observatory grounds, necks craned toward the night sky. The meteor shower had drawn a small crowd of astronomy enthusiasts, their excited murmurs creating a gentle backdrop to the celestial display. There! James pointed as a streak of light flashed across the darkness. Make a wish. I glanced at him, his profile illuminated by the soft glow of distant security lights. At 70, he had the energy and curiosity of a much younger man, his eyes bright with enthusiasm for the wonders above us. What would you wish for? I asked. He turned to meet my gaze, his expression softening. More evenings like this one. More moments of beauty shared with someone who appreciates them. In the darkness, his hand found mine, our fingers intertwining naturally. We sat in comfortable silence as more meteors streaked overhead, each silent flash a reminder of how, briefly, we illuminate the universe. Maggie, James said quietly, I know we've been taking things slowly, and I respect that. But I want you to know that I'm falling in love with you. After Helen died, I never expected to feel this way again. My heart quickened at his words. At 72, I had thought certain chapters of my life were closed forever. Romance, passion, the tender vulnerability of new love. Yet here I was, hand in hand with a good man under a canopy of stars, feeling possibilities unfold that I had long since abandoned. I'm scared, I admitted softly. After 50 years with one person, after discovering how thoroughly I could be deceived. Trust doesn't come easily. James nodded, his thumb tracing gentle circles on my palm. Of course you're scared. You've been through an earthquake that shattered the foundation of your life. Rebuilding takes time. He smiled gently. I'm not asking for promises, Maggie. Just openness to whatever this might become. As another meteor blazed across the sky, I leaned against his shoulder, allowing myself to feel the simple comfort of connection without expectation or demand. I think I can manage that, I whispered. In the months that followed, life settled into new rhythms. The divorce receded from local gossip as fresher scandals emerged to capture Cedar Grove's attention. I continued volunteering at the literacy program, expanding my role to help develop curriculum for adult learners. My art history class led to a painting workshop, where I discovered a modest talent for watercolors, something I might never have explored in my previous life. James and I grew closer, our relationship deepening with shared experiences and honest conversation. We traveled to Chicago for a weekend to see the Art Institute, spent a week exploring the autumn foliage in New England, and established simple traditions like Sunday morning coffee at Riverside Cafe. He never pushed for commitments I wasn't ready to make, content to let our connection evolve at its own pace. 1 year to the day after finding Robert's birthday card, I hosted a dinner party in my apartment, a deliberate celebration of my new life rather than a mourning of what was lost. Around my table gathered those who had supported me through transformation. Carol, whose unwavering friendship had been my anchor. James, whose gentle patience had opened my heart to new possibilities. Maria, whose determination had reminded me of the joy of teaching. And to everyone's surprise, Rebecca and Eliza, who had cautiously forged a sisterly bond despite the complicated circumstances of their connection. As we shared food and wine and laughter, I looked around at these dear faces and felt a profound gratitude wash over me. My life had taken an unexpected turn at 72, shattering the identity I had cultivated for half a century. Yet from those broken pieces, I had crafted something authentic and beautiful, a life truly my own, filled with genuine connections and purposeful days. Later, as the evening wound down and guests departed with warm hugs and promises to gather again soon, James lingered, helping me clear away dishes and wine glasses. "Happy anniversary," he said softly, placing a kiss on my cheek. "1 year of your new life." I leaned into his embrace, reflecting on the journey that had brought me to this moment. "I never imagined starting over at 72, I admitted. "But I wouldn't trade what I've found for anything, not even 50 more years of comfortable illusion." James nodded, understanding the complex mix of loss and liberation that colored my perspective. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "there's something profoundly brave about facing truth at our age. Most people settle deeper into their comfortable patterns as they grow older, not blow them apart to seek something more authentic." As we stood together in my kitchen, the city lights twinkling beyond my windows, I realized that the woman I had become over this transformative year was someone I genuinely liked. Someone with courage and resilience, with capacity for growth and change, with an open heart despite deep wounds. The path forward wasn't perfectly clear. There would be more challenging conversations with my children as they navigated relationships with their half-siblings. There would be moments when memories of my life with Robert, the good years, the genuine connections, would bring unexpected pangs of grief for what might have been if he had chosen honesty. But standing there in James's gentle embrace, I felt a bone-deep certainty that I was exactly where I needed to be. After 50 years of marriage to a man with a secret family, I had created a secret of my own. The precious knowledge that it's never too late to begin again, to reclaim your authentic self, to build a life of truth and meaning. Some might call it a tragedy to discover a 50-year deception at the age of 72. But I had come to see it differently. Without that painful revelation, I might never have discovered my own capacity for courage, for growth, for joy independent of others' expectations. I might have lived out my remaining years in comfortable ignorance, never knowing the woman I could become when finally standing on my own. And that, I realized, would have been the greater tragedy. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories, right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.